Now he's outdoors. The synagogue will be shut to him, so his church will be a lake and a boat his pulpit. Jesus is teaching the people about God and faith and the human condition. He loves people, so he's giving them wisdom about how to live. Jesus is good at it, so pretty soon there's a crowd. He sees two boats, and he gets into one. Apparently he knows Simon Peter. Simon, he says, "Take me out into the water so I can teach." Peter rolls his eyes and rows out a few feet, drops the anchor. Jesus sits down, maybe because it's difficult to stand in a boat, or maybe because his sermon is going to go on and on for a very long time, which those of us who preach them often enjoy. Peter was probably tired after fishing all night, catching nothing. I wonder if he started to, get a little drowsy, started nodding off a bit during the sermon, wishing he'd brought some coffee in his thermos. I wonder what Jesus talked about. Maybe it was how he claimed to be the light of the world, and maybe Peter sat there thinking, I wish that were true. Or maybe Jesus said something like, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And maybe Peter thought, so God is for those who are beaten down and discouraged, for those to whom the world made cry uncle. Or maybe Jesus preached about how love covers a multitude of sins, which is something Peter experienced later, warming himself by the fire when Jesus was on trial, when he denied even knowing him. And that same resurrected Jesus put that same Peter in charge of his church. Maybe for Peter, as he hears Jesus talk, there's this strange combination going on. A combination of hope about what might be and regret about how far he's fallen. I've known what it's like to fall short. I've had some, as Isaiah, woe is me times. As a young person, I don't know, maybe 19, 20, the first one that comes to my mind is when I lived in a marijuana house before it was legal on Stone Street in Saginaw. How fitting that is. We climbed up the street sign and we painted a white D on the sign, making it Stoned Street, because that's what it was. And in all the partying and the pretending and the endless emptiness, night after night, one night I looked around at all the drunkards and the addicts in the living room and the dead-end street my life became, and it seemed I could hear an extra laugh among the crowd. One extra mockery, one scoff directed at me. It was the voice of my own demon. So like Peter, I made a choice to push out into the deep water. As theologian Gladys Knight once said, I chose to go on that midnight train to heaven because I'd rather live in his world than without him in mine. I may still not be a theologian, but I'm certainly a pip. Pip too. When the sermon ended, Peter, he began to row to shore. But Jesus had other plans. Put out into the deep, he said, and let down your nets for a catch. Have you ever experienced a situation where, you're really good at doing something, you're an expert, like at your job, and somebody who's an amateur starts giving you advice? Peter's a fisherman. Jesus is a carpenter. Peter could have easily said, hey, Jesus, I won't tell you how to preach, and you don't tell me how to catch fish, okay? But you know what? Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Instead, Peter says, because you say so, I'll let down the nets. And Peter calls Jesus Master. It's Peter's boat, but he's aware that there's a presence and a power about this person that is greater than himself. Peter didn't see what Jesus saw. He didn't see what Jesus saw, but he was willing to do as Jesus said. Isn't that what faith is all about? He went out into the deep waters, and there was a big catch. Afterward, Peter reacted differently than what I would have expected him to do, than what I thought he might do. It is like when the Baptist pastor announced to the morning congregation, in order to raise funds for the church, whoever donates $100 will have the privilege of picking 3 hymns for tonight's service. Immediately in the front pew, old Mrs. Snitchler stood up, waved a $100 bill, said, "Here you go," and handed it to the pastor. "Okay, then," the pastor said, "which 3 hymns would you like for tonight?" She answered, "Well, I'll take him, and I'll take him, and I'll take him." Now, if you liked that, that was my joke. If you didn't like that, it was Don's joke. He told me yesterday. Peter responded differently to Jesus' miracle. Not with exuberance and happiness. Hey, let's go into business together. Hey, what do you say? But instead, he had a sort of sacred humility. No more pretending, but deep self-awareness and confession. The way I guess anyone would act in the presence of pure holiness. It is in the deep, soul-stirring waters where we are undone again by who he is. Put out into the deep. Don't be afraid. Don't settle for mediocrity. Get out of the rut. When we truly meet Christ, we change. We become not the way we were, but the way we can be. You have a story, a life story. God has a life story for you. Spirituality is about choosing to live God's story. It's just like the biblical heroes, Abraham, Moses, Ruth, David, Nicodemus, Mary Magdalene, the prodigal son, the woman at the well, on and on and on. You have a life. God has a life for you. Which will you choose? Don't settle for the life of what you could have been. The poet Khalil Gibran described such a person like a fox. A fox. He looked at his long shadow at sunrise and said, "Today I'm going to have a camel for lunch." So all morning along he went looking for camels. At noon, the fox saw his diminished shadow and said, "A mouse will do." Don't scale down your life. Don't become a small replica or a mere shadow of what you could be, what might have been. Put out into the deep. Rekindle your souls. Commit to learning and working and searching toward the you God meant you to be. And join all of us other committed, learning, working searchers who desire not to be perfect, not to be goody two-shoes, but simply to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be hopeful, to be at peace. Isn't that what we all want? Now, Peter could have said, "No thanks, I'm tired. Go find another boat." But instead, Peter said, "Circumstances be what they may, if you say so, I'll go out there again and drop my nets." Simon Peter pushed aside his doubts and his discouragements, and he pushes out into the deep, and from then on, everything is bigger and new and alive. And Jesus asks us to do the same thing, to join him, to find nourishment in a barren land. With newfound faith, take up the adventure, put out into the deep. One Episcopalian author I like to read said, "We are in a war in the church today, a war with dullness. The most critical issue facing Christians is not morality or the breakdown of family or school prayer or drugs or sexual immorality or addiction or if Starbucks doesn't say Merry Christmas anymore. The critical issue today is dullness. We have lost our astonishment and our wonder. The good news is no longer good news, it's okay news. Christianity is no longer life-changing, it's merely life-enhancing. Jesus doesn't change people into wide-eyed radicals anymore. He changes them into nice people. Well, I'm not interested in being nice. I'm interested in turning the world upside down. I'm interested in a life-threatening, soul-bending, wildfire gospel that's dangerous and chases fear away. God save me, God save all of us from a flat soul. I want to intimately know the one who broke all the rules over and over again, who touched lepers and forgave adulterers and hung out with sinners. Jesus, who said, "Don't spend your life learning what you can't do, but celebrate what you can do with me, because I'm in your boat." Amen.